So, you want to code a plugin for SCPSL using the Exiled framework. First off, you're going to need an IDE. Right here I'm at an IDE, or the website for an IDE I use, JetBrains Rider. If you prefer to use Visual Studio, feel free. However, I can't cover every edge case. If you do use it, what you're going to do is obviously download it, install it, etc. You'll need to make sure you have the .NET 4.8 framework, as that's what Exiled uses. Once that's all set up, you can just run it. And what you're going to want to do is create a new solution. Console application. No, not a console application, a class library using 4.8 C#. Name it whatever you want. In this case, I'll name it test plugin. Once you've named what you want, or your plugin what you want to, just hit create. Let Rider start up. First thing you're going to want to do, I guess, first thing you want to do as soon as you create a new plugin is you're going to need to add references to Exiled such that your IDE or code editor knows what Exiled is and therefore how you'll interact with the game. So you can do that by going to NuGet button down here, searching for Exiled, and you're going to go for xmod.exiled, as this is the fork we're using. I don't know about this one. This one is just a deprecated version of this one, so just install this one. Once it is installed, make sure you check your dependencies, assemblies, make sure there's no errors anywhere. That's something common that can happen. If you do get an error, go to the Discord, and under dev resources, I believe, there is a link to a download where you'll have all dependencies you might need. For instance, if I open up references, I can add a reference as I want. Okay, once you download it, extract it, etc., here's a list of all dependencies you might want to use. Some are just systems, some are Unity, which can be useful if you want to interact with certain objects. You need to tell your IDE what certain objects are. Some common ones you'll want are the Unity engine.core or just unity.core. Yeah, Unity engine.core module.dll. Make sure you have that. There's other certain ones like physics pertains to vectors, I believe. You can always ask if you need help. Then, now that we have our dependencies relatively set up, first thing you're going to want to do is change the class it gives you, probably to just whatever you want. And then you're going to add this colon, and then you're going to do plugin config. While this might not make sense later, I'll try and explain it. This plugin is from Exiled, so what you're going to want to do is hit Alt-Enter. It's going to automatically pull the reference. And this here, it might want you to import something, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to right-click this, click Add class/interface, create a file called config. Inside it has its own class. And then same thing with the colon. Then make sure you reference this. You do the control colon, which is what I do instead of Alt-Enter. It'll automatically add this, which tells this file, hey, when you say iconfig, it's using this, which has a lot of things inside of it. Now, the reason this is angry, which is what the red squigglies mean, this is because certain things aren't implemented, or we just don't have certain things within this. Most notably is we don't have the isEnabled and debug functionality, which is, you know, kind of important to plugins. So what you're going to do is public override bool is enabled. IDE is telling me, helping me. Though it might not be override. I don't know. I just normally copy paste my own code. You see, now it's happy for that. You don't need this bit technically, but if you add it, whenever you start up or whenever you add your plugin and start the server, this is what it'll default to instead of false, I believe. So now you can do public bool debug get set. We don't need to add anything. It'll default to false. Now this is happy. This here, it realizes, oh hey, this is a config, this here. So it's creating a new plugin using this as its config. I'll rename this file just so it's easier to remember. And now in here, I'm gonna do something which might seem a bit weird, but we're gonna go public static test plugin instance get, I guess, private set, although it technically doesn't matter. It's equal to new. Well, no, I actually can't initialize it yet. And while this might not make sense, I'll try and explain it once again. The term public means it's accessible anywhere. A class is something that can have methods or other classes within it. Static means it's pre-generated. It's like it's always been there. You don't need to create it whenever you start up your code. So if you try to reference like a static variable within a method that, or within another, let's say we have another class, and that's a bit of a tutorial, but if you have another class, you can reference this static object if you'd like. And what this means is it's an instance of this class. And here's instance, that way it's easy to remember. The private set just means only the class itself can set it. After that, well, plugin, or not my plugin, my IDE is already telling me certain things I might want to do, like implementing a name, etc. for what this plugin is, who made it, what's the required version. I won't be showing you that. If you want to look it up, here I pulled up this. This has lots of things you can read about. You can always ask the Discord, but for a second video, I'm going to cover custom items. You ever need to figure out anything in here, just go to here. Just tons of stuff you can use here. So it's a very useful tool if you need to look up something, or you can follow your IDE. We are going to override something though, and that's going to be the onEnabled method. And we're going to, my IDE did most of the work for me because it's smart. And the reason it's grayed out is because technically this does nothing, but we're going to make it do stuff once we add some other code. And this here just means there's irrelevant code. Well, something we can do is here is, yeah, instance equals this. Like I said, IDE smart. Something else you're going to want to add is public override void onDisabled, set instance to null, base.onDisabled. And what these two methods, which is what these are, what they are is what they run when the plugin is enabled or disabled. So instance equals this means that this test plugin is equal to this, which is the plugin when it's initialized. And then I'll do all the necessary code for enabling. Now that we have this, we're going to create an event handler, which sounds complicated, but isn't really. What you're going to want to do is create a new directory, unless you want to have a bunch of files that are unorganized. I'm just going to name this event handlers. Then in this, we're going to add one for verification. You can name it whatever you want. Literally, the name doesn't matter. And then here, we're going to try and look in here for what we want, which is going to be likely under exiled.events. Well, I say dot because it's a bit of a habit, but in here. So if you go to handlers here, Here's all the event handlers, which I'll show in a little bit. If you look in here, we can find certain events. Like all these here. In fact, you could probably use Control F. Yeah. Here's the event for being verified. And what you're going to use from here, well, there we go. What I used is a power toys thing, but basically lets me pin the tab so I can have it open. We're going to use onVerified, which is the event. You don't want to look for stuff further up, which is just this. These are the events themselves. If you Control F, you're going to go to the instance where it says onVerified, or there's a lot of ons down here. There's other things like round started, etc., which technically don't have the on thing, but the prefix on is there for most events. What you're going to do is basically copy the code there, public static void on verified event args. And the standard is usually to add EV at the end. What this is this is the type and this is the variable. So this is technically a method, but we're going to basically have it run whenever a verification happens. And it's going to run this code, and we say, hey, when you run this code, it needs to have verified event args, which we then abbreviate to EV. And verified event args have all these different things. Like if we look at the other event args, which I can just look up. So say we say changed item event args. You can even look here as information for what happens. This occurs after a player's held item changes. You can look at the event args here. There's stuff like player, old item, and the new item. Lots of descriptions. Make sure to read through. But for our case, we just used verified event args. And then now what we can do, we can do ev.player.broadcast, and there's, once again, a lot of things you can do to players. So if you want, you can take the time to scroll through, look for anything that's interesting. I mean, you can even give them God mode on verified if you'd want. But we're just going to use broadcast. And I just hit a lot of buttons on accident. And here, while this highlighted code might look weird, you don't really know what a broadcast is. It's an object, probably has duration, message, etc. You look down here, this is what you should look for. This is a different way to use the broadcast method, which is what this is. It uses a ushort, duration, message. Anyways, duration makes sense. We can just do like 10. The plugin ran shall be our message. Then here you might be confused what this is, but if you see something like this, where it has a dot and then blue text, it typically means it's an enum, which is basically a list of different predetermined properties that you can select, or multiple. Now, there's different ones for different things, like you can make your broadcast look like admin chat, I guess truncated, whatever that means. But we're just going to go with normal, which is grayed out because that's the default, and my IDE is telling me, hey, using default behavior. It's a waste of time. We can also use should clear previous and set this to true if we want. So I guess this technically is irrelevant. We could just straight up get rid of this. The only thing that changed when I hit delete was that the should clear previous defaulted to false, but it doesn't matter because when a player joins, there's no other broadcasts. So now what will happen is if this code runs with the event args, if everything runs properly, it'll take the player, it'll broadcast to them. The plugin ran. But what we now need to do is make it so that when our plugin starts, then the server will automatically assign an event to this, such that if a player joins, it runs this. Because this is how Exiled works, is you have events. So to show what this looks like, we'll go to here. You can put it wherever you want in here. So I'll just put it below the instance, above the base. Then we're going to go to event handlers. These curly brackets means it's namespace, meaning it's like a directory. You can even see it here, test plugin.event handlers. So we know it's referencing that folder. Then we're going to go to verification. Then we're going to go to onVerified. And I technically did this in the wrong way, but I shall fix it. One thing I like to do, by the way, is this. I like to add this statement, which basically means whenever I type ePlayer, it means this. And the reason I use ePlayer is it stands for event player, because this is exiled.events.handlers.player. Whenever you're subscribing to events, you need to use the event handler, which has the event with it. So I'll just add some space. I can go ePlayer, which will default to this whole thing, so I don't have to type it out myself. Then I can go to verified. You don't use this, use this. You do plus equals, and then your event. And what this basically means is that once your server starts, it'll take the player from exile.events.handlers.player, get the verified event, and then whenever this event triggers, it'll fire this with verified event args, which only has ev.player, but this is how we can interact with the player. Something you also should do, should, because you might crash your server or something otherwise, is copy paste it down here, place the plus with a minus. This basically unsubscribes to the event, so that, I don't really know. There's something about it in the Exiled docs. I just do it because it's standard. But let's say we want this message to be dynamic. Well, we could run this code and it'll be this. Let's just go above and beyond and say we want to be able to write in the config what this message says. What you're going to want to do is we're going to use our instance now that we made before. Well, first you actually need to add a config thing. So I'll just do public string message is equal to the plugin ran. Now, the reason I add this equal sign is so it defaults to something. That way, when we run the server, it'll say this, but then we can go into the config, change it to whatever we want. Now in here, I'm going to delete this. We're going to go to test plugin. We're going to use the class, not the namespace. Can be confusing, but it's basically referring to this file, not this whole area with files in it. And we're going to do instance config message. Now what this means is we go to the class here and we get this static instance, which will be equal to the plugin once it's enabled. And this code up here can't really fire until this thing is set, so we don't have to worry about this being null. It gets the config from the instance of the plugin, and it gets the message, which is in here and pre-generated. My IDE says it can be made read-only. I mean, I guess it could, but I don't really care. Although I've heard that you can't change the plugin from, or you can't change the config from the plugin, but I don't really care. Now that we have all this, we have our event, our plugin, we have our unenabled, undisabled. We make sure to handle everything properly such that we don't leave anything unaccounted for, because this is, I guess, what's expected of us. Now that we have everything, what you're going to want to do is go up here to this button, or wherever you see a word that says build somewhere. You're just going to hit this button. It's going to compile the whole thing. What you're going to want to do is, using file path you got earlier, you're going to find your plugin, And then once you're in here, go to test plugin, and then you go to bin. In my case, it's going to be debug, although you can change your IDE to compile your plugin to be like optimized for release, debugging, etc. I just default to debug. Then in here, there's a lot of files, but you're going to use this. Everything else is just a dependency you might need, but Exiled will already have everything else you'd want. Now that you have this, you're going to go to your Exiled/plugins folder. You're just going to drag over to copy it. Once you've done that, just need what you want to do now, start your server. I'm going to move this away so I don't leak my own IP address. I'll also start up Steam, start up SL. Alright, here we are. Join my server. Gotta wait for off. And ta-da! There's our broadcast. But now what we want to worry about is changing config. So what you'll do is open up your plugins, go here, open this up. I'll use VS Code as my default. Here's the config file. Lots of settings for everything else, like credits, custom items, etc. if you ever use that. Scroll down and the message field is not here. Well, I'm gonna have to research this. Let me go reference some previous code. Alright, so I referenced previous code and I forgot the get set. So now the code should work. So come back here, open these both up, move this to this. Oops. You start your server. I'll pull up VS Code. Ah, there. Now the field appears. So now you can see this worked. If we go here, let's say this proves the config works. Save it, restart the server. And there we go. Config works now. Well, I guess now that I've shown how to code some basic stuff in SL, oops, accidentally opened up. I don't even know what it's called. WebStorm? Yeah. I guess I should explain what this means, considering I forgot it. So as a final note, unless you know, if you don't know C#, you can stick around, but I guess you're done otherwise. But this colon means it's inheriting from another class. So this plugin is another class, kind of like this. It has its own methods and stuff in it. And this override means we're taking the methods from here. We're rewriting them with what we have. And this means that the plugin was created using this config. It's pretty complicated because Exiled is complicated, but I mean, that's why we use Exiled. So it does all the complicated stuff for us. But if you see notation like this, it means it's just inheriting properties from another class, which means we can override certain properties, which can be desirable. We can also, we don't have to only override. Here we created a new property in a new instance of the plugin class. And that's about it. If you enjoyed, like the video and subscribe, I guess. I'll make another video on custom items soon. Well, at least hopefully.